All right. Okay, how y'all today? I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get back up on this thing. I directed a play called Harvey, and that was 6 to 7 weeks of being there every night, in other words, and helping the actors and things like that. And as you know, I've told you already, I love to build sets for plays, and I usually do that. But they asked me to direct this time, and I was kind of leery of it, but I went ahead and did it, and the play turned out good. Everything went good. So I've been really kind of very, very busy last 7 weeks or more, and then we had to play for 2 weeks, so that was a busy thing. Anyway, I want to talk to you today about something concerning carving, and let's talk carving, and it has to do with roughouts. Now, when I first started carving, now most of you know what roughouts are. Roughouts are pieces that are probably say 50 to 70% finished whenever you buy them, and they actually use routers to create these roughouts. When the last show I was in, or went to the Texas Woodcarvers Guild, more roughouts was there, and they're a huge supplier of roughouts. And he was starting to not make roughouts anymore because his machine broke, and it was so expensive to fix his machine that he was not going to continue doing it. And I understand that. You know, I mean, those machines cost a lot of money. Well, when I first started carving, roughouts had a very bad name, and a lot of people at that time felt that if you used a roughout, it was cheating. In fact, they wouldn't even recognize roughout in shows or anything like that. If you used a roughout, you couldn't even enter in the show and whatever. And you know, it was just it was a taboo type thing that people did not want to talk about. They felt that it was wrong and everything like that. Well, times have changed. I'm talking about 30 years, well, 25, 30 years ago is when I'm talking, when this all went about. And so over the years, and especially what COVID caused, where a lot of people began to teach online and do their classes online, the whole aspect of roughouts has been totally changed. And I did a few carvings with roughouts. Most of mine are cutouts. They're cut out for the bandsaw, and so is it any different? A little bit, but not much, in other words. But roughouts now has become a factor in a lot of shows that you go to, and people who teach wood carving or teach classes use roughouts as the factor in their carving classes. So there's a whole new aspect of what roughouts are and how we use them, and how they are no longer a concept of cheating or anything like that, but they're a concept of learning. And when roughouts were created, they were just created for a particular reason, and that is for people that did not have access to, for instance, you live in an apartment in New York, or you live in an apartment somewhere else, and you don't have access to a bandsaw. Maybe you don't have a bandsaw, you don't have a place for one, or whatever it is. So people were not able to cut out their pieces, and now on a lot of videos now, people want to carve out of a block of wood, and that's fine, that's good in such a way. But a lot of people, like myself, I mean, I bought a $700 bandsaw. Why in the world wouldn't I use it to cut out my pieces, you know? Well, the same thing occurs when you're talking about a roughout. Now, a roughout is simply the fact that someone, usually it's a carver that sends his piece to a man who has a roughout machine, which is very similar to routing machines and things like that. they simply put this rough out there, and then it's followed by the machine, and then it cuts out the block and shape. Now it does not do the details like the facials and the things like that. That all has to be done by the carver. But most teachers now, that's what they use in their classes, is roughouts. And they are no longer the taboo. They are no longer the fact that, now I do know that in most shows they have a category for roughouts. They don't want you to enter a roughout in a show against people who are not using a roughout. But they do have special categories for people that are using a roughout to do that. So the whole concept of using a roughout has changed. I did, I think probably 6, 7, 8 videos on Alan Goodman put out a roughout, and I was showing how you changed Alan Goodman's roughout and did that, and then Mike Shipley, some of his Santas and things like that. So the concept we're trying to come today is for to understand that roughouts are now a part, as where they were shunned, they are now a part of the carving community. And one of the good things about it, and if you watch people like Van Kelly he uses roughouts to teach, to go by and things like that. And most teachers now that want to teach on the internet, you go and you get the roughout. You buy the roughout just before the class, and then when the class comes, you pay, or you pay and you get the roughout in the class and all that other stuff. Then he shows you how to make a figure. So this is not the taboo of, oh, you're cheating. Oh, you shouldn't do those type of things. You shouldn't use those type of things. You shouldn't get those type of things. Totally different today than what it used to be. And roughouts, the wonderful thing about them is the fact that they, for beginners a lot of times that don't necessarily can rough out a block of wood, can also use a roughout to do the finishing details and have a very good looking carving. Look folks, let's be honest with ourselves. None of us are going for the gold, okay? None of us are trying to we just want to have fun carving. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't go do your best and do the best you can and take classes and learn. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the fact that you're not going to do this for a living. That's not what you're going to do. Very few people do carving for a living because it's very hard to make it. It really is in a lot of ways. So if you want to use a roughout, that's good. Because if you take a class, you're going to use one. That's what you're going to use. So now let's talk about things considering the cost of a roughout and who has them and those type of things. Well, unfortunately, More Roughouts is no longer going to sell them. When he was at the Texas Woodcarvers Guild, he had some that were left over, but he said that he would not continue to make them. Now, you can get a lot of them from the individual teachers that teach these particular classes and things like that. And so you can get them, you can still, like Van Kelly, he carries the Mike Shipley roughouts, the bears and those things like that. And he would be happy to sell you roughouts. And then the main thing is to go online and look at carving roughouts and who carries them. And you will see a line of people who do carry them and who do them. And that is what is most important. You'll find them. There's quite a few people. I mean, Roger Siegel has a lot of Roughtous that I remember when I went to a show one time, he had the finished pieces in front of the Roughtous, and he had a bunch of Roughtous. So most carving shows that you go to, they're going to have Roughtous in it. And the Roughtous are not necessarily a business, but it's by a lot of the people who like teach and those type of things. So if you're going to take a class, you're going to be using a Roughtous. And that's what they do. And so it gives a person the chance not to have to spend so much time going through the roughing out period and stuff like that. And it gives them a chance to do the more delicate, more intricate parts of the carving itself. And it helps them so much to understand a lot of things. So when you talk about Roughtous and you talk about those type of things, and like today, Roughtous are used a lot in creating and making things. Now that they have CRC machines, they can create Roughtous. They can do those things now. They're very expensive for people who do make them. But a person now, if he wants to teach classes, can send one of his pieces in to one of these places and get a Roughtous made of it so that he can teach his class. And it depends on how many students. So there's no longer the taboo. There's no longer the I shouldn't use these things or whatever, because it makes things just a lot easier. Now, like I said, I don't use them that much. I don't use them because I have a bandsaw and I like to create my own design. But I took a Roughtous one time. I never forgot it. I think it was a hillbilly or something like that. And I took the Roughtous and I created a duck hunter with him. And I've used a lot of Mike Shipley Roughtous. And instead of the bear with the hands in his pocket, I had the bear with his hands out of his pocket and things like that. You can do those type of things with a Roughtous. So you can design them in such a way that it doesn't even necessarily look exactly like the piece itself that he's doing. So what I'm saying is they're good tools. They're excellent tools, and they're good tools. Now let me show you something. I found this in Branson, Missouri, and I want you to look at this for a minute. Now, isn't that a pretty little carving right there? Pretty little carving. The only problem is that's not a carving. That's a casting of an original carving. That's a casting of one. And they just painted it. And it was $10. $10. See how pretty that is? $10 for that piece. Now, the original probably would run somewhere of $90 to $100 perhaps. Or less than that, maybe $75 to $100. But if you had to buy the original, that's what it would cost. But this was $10. Now, does this look nice? Of course it does. But this is a casting. This is a casting from the original carving. And it's easier to make. They just paint it. They do those things. So what I'm trying to explain is this is the way a lot of carving is going. A lot of people are not willing to pay $100 or $200 or whatever for a carving, unless you're a collector or whatever it is. So they cast. One of the first people I saw doing that was Chris Hammack. Chris Hammack would often cast his bottle stoppers in a clay or a resin, and he would paint them in such a way, and they looked just like the originals. They really did. And he sold them for around $30, $35, a lot cheaper than what his originals would have been. So that's the way, kind of the way I look at Roughtous in a lot of ways. Many years ago, and I don't have it with me, but I have it in the house, but I purchased a Engler, a Richard Engler hillbilly that had been cast from ground up pecan shells. And I found it in a thrift shop over there in Branson. And it was, I think it was only about $15 or whatever it was. But it was a nice piece. And it looked just like the original. But it was made out of pecan shells. They had pressed pecan shells, and whoever, whoever took the mold or whatever it is. So when it comes down to, and a lot of people say, well, that's cheating. That's cheating. Well, look, it doesn't matter. If people are not willing to spend $100 for something, and are willing to spend $10 or $20 on something, then they will buy the thing that's $20. So we just have to understand that that comes with the territory of carving and wanting to sell your carvings and do those type of things. And people, a lot of people, when you post a rough out on social media, like one of these carving groups, they really want you to name the carver that comes from the rough out. And I understand that. That's just courtesy. So a lot of people do. They'll say, I carved this from a rough out from Harry Ristful or Mike Shipley or Dave Stetson or someone like that, in other words. And they're proud of it. And they turn around and sell it. I mean, there's no law against it to sell the rough out. And do people always tell them that's somebody's rough out? I've heard a guy one time say, well, if you, I mean, when I first started, people were very jealous of rough outs. In fact, there was a show when this guy entered a beautiful mountain man, and someone said, well, the reason he won is because it was a rough out. He started from a rough out. Well, I don't know if it was or not, but I think maybe that was just jealousy. But whether it was, it wasn't. It was a beautiful piece. And just because there's a lot of people who mess up a rough out. I couldn't, and so it isn't always that case. So when we talk about using rough outs, don't feel bad about them. Just use them. And a lot of people, do use them now because they take classes and you use them in those classes. But there's one thing before I go here we want to talk about for just a second, and that is the expense of a rough out. Is it a lot more to purchase a rough out than it is to use wood of your own? Well, yeah, of course it is. Yeah, I mean, most rough outs run around $25, $35, something like that. Yeah, rough outs they're not the cheapest thing in the world. They are more expensive, and they are, they're not an economical type way of doing it. But in most cases, you're going to have to pay that price. But that's okay. When you get through with it, you have a beautiful piece. Then, some people say, well, you've got to tell the person who is, like it, when you're in a carving show, okay? But you got to tell the person, there's purists, as we may say. But you've got to tell the person that you carved that from a rough out and not on your own or something like that. And some guy challenged me one time about that. Well, he didn't tell him, he sold it, but he didn't tell him it was a rough out. And, I want to picture this little scenario here. Say I carved something from a rough out. And I tell you, some people have carved rough outs and they look better than the original. So, but say I do carve a rough out, and I'm selling it at a carving show. And some guy walks up there and says, hey, I like that carving and everything like that. And I sell it to him. But I forget to tell him that it is a rough out and that, it was something that I used and everything like that. what in the world can we imagine or think that if I even told that person who's buying it, that what am I supposed to say? Well, I didn't really carve this. This is from a rough out. You know, they're not going to accept that. The normal person walking up there has no idea about carving. He just sees something he likes and all that other stuff. And now if it's another carver and wants to buy it, yeah, you say, well, this is a rough out I did it from and all that other stuff. They understand that. But the public doesn't understand that. They have no idea what, you know, what a rough out is, or what its purpose or anything like that. So when it comes down to it, they don't know. They have no idea. So don't worry about silly things like that. Don't worry about things that don't matter all that much. And just you know, make it the way you want it. And you know, if you want to do better, then do better and everything like that. So anyway, that's our little talk today, and I appreciate it. I hope everyone is carving well. I hope to do another video, a carving video, because I'm doing something right now, and I'll show you in the video. I'm sorry, there's something in my eye. I'm cutting grass today, and I'm doing a little courtroom scene like the Andy Anderson. It's going to be a tribute to the great Andy Anderson stuff, in my own style, in my own way. So anyway, thank you for coming. God bless you, and keep carving. Stay safe. Beginners, use your gloves, and may the Lord bless you. Bye-bye now.